Now there is only one king of geckos, and that is the giant gecko, also known as the Rhacodactylus leachianis. And a lot of people are taking care of them wrong, but in this video I'm going to show you exactly how to take care of your leachies. So the giant gecko is the world's biggest species of geckos, and as you can see, this guy is almost as long as my forearm. This is a huge animal. This is his girlfriend right here. And one interesting thing about Leachianis is that they pair bond with their females. Once they have a female partner, they will typically just be with that female partner. They're not womanizers. They don't like to be with a bunch of women. They just stick to one girl, and they spend the rest of their life living in a cork round or in a tree hollow in the wild. Now these guys are from New Caledonia, like a lot of the geckos in this room, like the crested geckos, the gargoyle geckos, and all that. And they are basically just as easy to take care of, if not easier, because they're super hardy. Look at that size. I mean, when it comes to geckos, like if you're a gecko enthusiast, if you love animals, if you love lizards, you have to have a Leachie. There's nothing better than having two Leachies crawl on you. There are two main ways that people keep their Leachianis geckos. Now, my personal favorite way is going to be in a glass enclosure. This happens to be a 24 by 24 by 36 enclosure, and it is a great size for one adult Leachianis. Babies are a different story, but we're talking about adults first. Now, when you are setting up your enclosure, you want to make sure that you have a substrate that's going to hold the humidity somewhat good. We like to use the cypress mulch. If you've seen some of our other videos, cypress mulch as a substrate. The next thing when you want to set up the enclosure is going to be cork bark. Cork bark is going to be the best decoration that you could use for a giant gecko. Now, we like to use a lot of cork rounds and a lot of cork flats because they replicate how these animals are living in the wild. Now, the cork rounds are going to replicate the tree hollows that they hide in, and the cork bark is going to be a perfect place for them to just cling on when they want to hang out during the day. You could also add really thick branches across, horizontal from the enclosure, diagonal. You can add a lot of stuff in there to make it fill up the volume of the enclosure. One thing to keep in mind with Leachianis, especially as they get bigger, the plants, live plants or even fake plants, they're not going to hold their weight. So if you have live plants in there, they're going to plow right through them. And we don't like to use a lot of live plants for them for that reason. We like to keep it simple with the cork bark and maybe some really thick pieces of bamboo or other pieces of branches. Now, like any other gecko, these guys are going to require a little bit of a higher humidity. So a lot of times, depending on where you live, these screen top enclosures are going to lose way too much humidity. So what you can do is close off half of this screen with either like some saran wrap, or sometimes they even sell like a plastic top that you can put on this to help seal the humidity in better. But another thing that you could do to keep the humidity high is give them a big water bowl. These guys are avid drinkers. They have a large body mass, so misting isn't going to just do it. They're going to need a water bowl to drink water from, and that's also going to help the humidity in the enclosure. Now, the perfect ambient temperature for an adult Leachianis is going to be around 78 to 80 degrees. If you want to put a little basking spot and make it around like 85 to even 90 degrees with an adult Leachie, that is totally fine, but just make sure there's another area in that same enclosure in the 70s where they could cool off if they don't want to be hot. Adult Leachies are very, very hardy animals. It's not easy to kill them. So you just got to make sure that the temperatures are right, the humidity, their water, and their food, and there's really nothing to worry about. If you're getting a baby Leachie, the best way to keep them is in this small tub. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is too small. This, that, or the other, don't worry about it. Most animals at this size when they're babies, they're prey animals. So they want to feel secure. They don't want a big, overwhelming enclosure because a lot of open space scares these animals. So what we do for our baby Leachies here, it's very simple. We have a mulch substrate. We do a couple egg crates just like this, and you see our Leachie right here. Now this little baby is a new Ana, and they will definitely feel like prey if it's just left in a big open enclosure. Now, just like with the bigger Leachies, you want to make sure that they have a substrate that's going to hold humidity somewhat well, and the big water dish right here. Also, this food dish is going to be right here on the corner. This is how you want to keep it. With Leachies, it's very easy to mess up if you're trying to overcomplicate things. If you're keeping it simple, if you're doing what we tell you, there is no reason why you shouldn't have success. Now, one thing to keep in consideration is that these tubs have some sort of ventilation. They have a couple holes drilled in on the sides here, but that is not enough if you are drenching this thing by misting it too much when it's time to mist. We barely mist these enclosures. Now, because they have this top here that holds in the humidity well, we're gonna mist this maybe once every other day, and maybe just on one side. You don't want the enclosure to be wet the next time you come to open it. This shouldn't be wet at all times. It should just retain the humidity, but not be soaking. That's why the water dish is important, because if the Leachie does feel like it is needing to get hydrated, it's gonna drink from there, and it's not gonna need to be overly wet. But this is the most basic enclosure you could set up. Of course, you could trade out the egg crates if you don't wanna make it look like this. You could trade it out for small pieces of cork, pieces of fake plants, and all of that kind of stuff is gonna be useful for the Leachie to basically feel secure, break up the visual barriers here. It's gonna need to feel like it can hide from everything and not be a prey item. As you can see, I took everything out here, and the Leachie went to hide underneath the mulch here. Super important when you're keeping Leachies to have enough places for them to escape. But for the babies, it's as simple as a tub, water dish, and a place to hide. That's it. All right, guys, welcome back to Cooking with Manny. Now, Manny's not here today, but the one thing that we love to feed our giant geckos is going to be the grubs and fruit and the figs and insects. Now, Leachianas do require a little bit more protein, so aside from this being their main diet, we're going to feed them. If they're big enough, we could even feed them rodents sometimes, but they like to eat a lot of roaches off the tongs. Crickets, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get them to eat, but if they eat crickets, make sure you feed the crickets once a week, or roaches, or hornworms, or whatever big insect that you could find. Now, when we're making crested gecko diet, it's very important that you make it kind of thick. You want it to be thicker than almost like a ketchup consistency, right? So we have to use a blender because we have a lot of geckos, a lot of hungry Leachies. So we'll put this in here, we'll blend it up, and we'll have the gecko food. So the good thing about the New Caledonian geckos and most nocturnal species of geckos is that they do not require UVB. That's an advantage because we could keep them in rack systems, right? I wouldn't keep a Leachie in a rack system if you're not experienced with them, but it is a good way to keep them if you're willing to try. Now these guys, the rack system, these tubs are gonna hold the humidity a lot better. Now you could use a rack system, or you could use just one of these tubs with the lid on top, but you have to make sure that you cut out one of these holes and give them some ventilation, because if not, it's going to build up too much humidity, and then it is going to be a problem. If you've seen one of our other videos where the Leachies start to get infections, that is one of the problems, because if there's not enough airflow, not enough ventilation, then the humidity is going to start causing issues. You want the enclosure to start to dry out at certain periods of time. The tubs are going to be set up the same exact way you set up the other enclosure. Mulch, cork bark, Leachie. Boom, that's it. All right, guys, that wraps it up. That is how we take care of our giant geckos. And if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I will be answering everything in the next couple days. I am absolutely in love with these guys, and I know that you guys will be too if you get one of them.